Other people's systems let them sign in to get rich, or win over playboys to reach the peak of life. But I awakened a misery comes true system. As long as someone fakes an illness or cries poverty in front of me, the system will make their lies 100% real. Just a few minutes ago, I was still pulling an all-nighter on a PowerPoint presentation. Suddenly, everything went black, and when I opened my eyes again, I had transmigrated into the matriarch of the Marquis of Yonggan's estate in the Great Zhou dynasty. The original host was a massive pushover, completely brainwashed by the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Not only did she spend her own astronomical dowry to support the entire Marquis mansion, she also had to get up before dawn to check the accounts and work. She was practically a free, high-end nanny for the Marquis mansion, as well as their personal ATM. And now, just as I've transmigrated here, my scumbag husband, Gu Changfeng, has brought his beloved darling, Lin Chuchu, and burst in here, completely self-righteous.
Ruye, why are you just dazing off? That 100-year-old ginseng will only breed pests if locked away in your dowry warehouse. Chuchu's body is so weak right now, and she desperately needs nourishment. Hand over the warehouse token quickly. Do you really want to just stand by and watch her die?
Standing beside him, Lin Chuchu immediately swayed her body twice in perfect cooperation, holding her handkerchief to her chest, shedding tears on cue.
My lord, please do not, for my sake, hurt sister's feelings.
She gasped heavily for breath, looking as though she might pass away at any moment, weeping like a delicate blossom in the rain.
It is only that I am of meager fortune and humble life. The imperial physician said, my heart condition, if I don't have that 100-year-old ginseng to sustain me tonight, I'm afraid I won't even live to see tomorrow's sun. Sister is unwilling to give it, simply because Chuchu is not worthy.
Do you hear that? Chuchu is already this ill, yet you don't have a shred of compassion.
Looking at this wretched couple, I almost laughed out of sheer anger. Using my personal dowry to please a concubine, and you still have the nerve to stand on the moral high ground and criticize me? Just as I was about to flip the table, a crisp, mechanical voice suddenly popped up in my head. Target detected to be maliciously feigning misery. The misery feigning forced realization system has been successfully bound. As long as someone pretends to be sick, cries poverty, or plays the green tea hypocrite to feign misery in front of the host, the system will immediately strip away their true attributes, making their lies 100% come true. After hearing the system's introduction, my hand, which was tightly clutching the account book, slowly relaxed. You want to feign misery, right? Fine. I will satisfy you. I took a sip of the cold tea on the table and looked at Lin Chuchu down in the hall with a half-smile. Since you say you are ill-fated and of lowly life and cannot survive tonight, then this 100-year-old ginseng, which is a highly potent tonic used to sustain life, if consumed by your weak body that cannot handle such nourishment, wouldn't it cause you to drop dead instantly? I waved my hand and instructed my personal maid standing nearby. Go to the coffin shop on the east side of the city and order a cheap, thin-skinned coffin for concubine Lin. Since she won't survive tonight, we must prepare for her funeral immediately, lest her body starts to rot in the courtyard.
Shen Ruyu, how dare you curse Chuchu to die?
Before he could finish his sentence, Lin Chuchu, who had been standing perfectly fine a moment ago, suddenly went weak in both knees and collapsed heavily onto the flagstones and violently spat out a large mouthful of foul-smelling black blood. Gu Changfeng was startled and instinctively reached out to pull her up, but in the next second, Lin Chuchu let out an extremely piercing shriek. The long, dark hair she had always been proud of actually withered in large clumps in the blink of an eye and fell out. Not only that, she looked as if her life force had been instantly drained. Her once plump cheeks rapidly hollowed out, and her skin became shriveled and sallow like old tree bark.
My hair. My face. It hurts so much. Lord Marquis, save me.
Get away from me. What kind of monster is this?
Gu Changfeng backed away in sheer terror, kicking her away instantly. The servants filling the room screamed in panic, throwing the whole place into chaos. I sat steadily in my rosewood chair, enjoying the show. This was the physical manifestation of having no fortune and not surviving the night. The system certainly did not lie to me. I stood up, untied from my waist, the heavy ring of keys to the treasury, and the tally charms that symbolized managerial authority. Under Gu Changfeng's terrified gaze, I raised my hand and threw them hard right at his face. I clapped my hands clean. From now on, you can deal with the mess in this Marquis mansion yourselves. I am done serving you. With that, I took large strides out of the main hall. The sun was shining brightly outside. My retired life of watching dramas had only just begun. The day after I handed over the tally charms and treasury keys, the world of the Yonggan Marquis mansion came crashing down. I lay on the rocking chair in my courtyard, basking in the sun with my eyes closed. On the small white jade table by my side, there were grapes from the western regions and a plate of crystal shrimp dumplings freshly bought from Juxian Pavilion, the largest restaurant in town. Kuiju fanned me, while holding back her laughter as she reported.
Madam, you should have seen the chaotic mess in the front courtyard. The main kitchen went to the accounting office first thing this morning to withdraw money for groceries, but the accountant said there was not a single copper coin left in the public account. In the past, you always used your own dowry money to cover the deficit. Now that you've stopped, the Marquis can't bring himself to beg for loans. For lunch today, the main kitchen only brewed a bit of watery cabbage gruel for each courtyard. There wasn't even a speck of oil. I heard Lady Cow threw up after just one sip and is currently wailing in despair.
Let them make a scene. They have no money yet. They still want to put on the grand airs of a marquise's estate. Do they really think I run a charity? The original host of this body must have been blind. She married into this Marquis of Yong'un's estate with a massive dowry. On the surface, it looked like a scene of blooming flowers and raging prosperity, but in reality, the interior of this marquise's estate had already rotted to the core. It had relied entirely on the original host's dowry shops to pump blood and keep it alive. Now that I am no longer giving them money, they can't even afford to eat. As we were speaking, a sudden flurry of hurried footsteps came from outside the courtyard gate. Nanny Lee, who serves the old dowager Go, came scrambling and crawling in.
Madam, how can you still be in the mood to drink tea here? The old dowager has suddenly suffered a stroke. Her legs have lost all sensation, and she can no longer get out of bed. The Marquis wants you to go over immediately to attend to her.
I opened my eyes and cast a cold glance at her. A stroke. Yesterday morning, she was still in the main hall, scolding me with full vigor for not being a virtuous wife. Today, she is paralyzed, in all likelihood because the estate can't even put food on the table. This biased old woman is up to her tricks again, wanting to team up with her useless son to claw at my dowry. Let's go. Let's go pay a visit to our seriously ill old dowager. Inside Xuan Hall, the air was thick with the smell of medicine. Just as I stepped over the threshold, I heard old dowager Gu's weak, theatrical wailing. She was half reclining on the daybed, her legs covered with a thick brocade quilt. Gu Chengfeng was pacing around anxiously nearby. The moment he saw me enter, he immediately grimaced.
Shenruyu, how do you, a wicked woman, still have the nerve to show your face here? Mother was driven to illness by you.
I found a chair and sat straight down, with a half smile. Which physician from the Imperial Academy of Medicine said that? I'll go ask him right now. What kind of extraordinary, remote martial arts did I use to be able to paralyze the dowager while staying in my own courtyard? Gu Changfeng was left speechless by my sharp reply. Seeing this, the old dowager on the bed immediately began her performance.
What a sin. How did I end up marrying such an unfilial daughter-in-law into our family? Marquis, don't blame her. It is just that I, an old woman, am useless. These legs of mine have had absolutely no feelings since last night. They are completely ruined. I've become a useless person who can only lie in bed and eat free meals. Times are hard in the manor now, and we can't even pay the servants' monthly wages. A paralyzed old woman like me is only a burden to you all by staying alive. Ruyu, I know you blame me, but now that I am paralyzed, will you just watch the Marquis Manor collapse and watch my old bones rot in this bed?
Ruya, mother is already this ill. Are you really just going to stand by and watch? Hurry up and take out the land deeds for your 3 shops in the south of the city and sell them to hire the best physician for mother and buy the best medicine. If you have any conscience left, you should know that filial piety is of the utmost importance.
I watched the poor acting of this mother and son duo and was absolutely amazed. After all that build-up, feigning paralysis and crying poverty, in the end, aren't they just eyeing my 3 highly lucrative shops in the south of the city? Filial piety is of the utmost importance indeed. Using my private property to fulfill his own filial duties, I can hear their schemes loud and clear. Since you love faking paralysis and playing the victim so much, then today, I'll show some mercy and grant your wish. I let out a sigh, stood up, and slowly walked over to the dowager's bedside, a trace of sympathy showing in my eyes. Mother, these legs of yours, do they really have absolutely no feeling left?
They're ruined? Completely ruined. They're just like 2 pieces of wood. I'm afraid I'll never be able to step foot on the ground again in this lifetime.
Target detected. Dowager Madame Gu, currently faking illness and playing the victim with malicious intent. The karma realization system has been triggered. As the crisp notification rang in my mind, the curve of my lips instantly widened. I looked down at Dowager Madame Gu. Since your legs are already completely ruined, mother, and have become just like wood, leaving you unable to ever step foot on the ground again, then let's not bother treating them. After all, treating them would just be a waste of effort.
Shenruyu, what kind of outrageous nonsense is that?
However, at that very instant, a hair-raising sound of bones cracking suddenly came from beneath the dowager's silk blanket. Immediately following, the dowager, who had just been putting on a show of wiping away tears, widened her eyes in shock. Her eyeballs looked ready to pop out of their sockets. An incredibly shrill, agonizing shriek echoed throughout Chuan Hall. The dowager's legs, which had been perfectly mobile just moments ago, now seemed to have all of their bones and sinews drained away, collapsing in a bizarre, unnatural way. In sheer terror, she reached down to feel her legs, only to find that below her waist, she had completely lost all sensation. Even when she pinched herself hard enough to draw blood, she couldn't feel the slightest bit of pain.
My legs. Changfeng. I can't feel my legs. I really can't feel them at all. I can't move.
The dowager was frightened pale, and a suspicious yellow puddle even began to seep through her trousers. A foul odor instantly filled the room. Gu Changfeng backed away repeatedly in fright, covering his nose, his face filled with disbelief.
Mother, don't scare your son like this. Weren't you able to move just now?
They're really useless now. Help. Call the physician, quick.
With snot and tears streaming down the old matriarch's face, none of her former arrogance remained. Covering my mouth and nose with my handkerchief in disgust, I took 2 steps back to avoid the mess. Looking at the completely panicked mother and son, I added with deliberate slowness, "Oh dear, this is truly unfortunate." It seems mother was telling the truth. Those legs are indeed useless now. Since the manor has no money, why not pawn some of your belongings? I see that on the display shelf. That pair of famille rose vases from the previous dynasty is quite nice. Pawning them should be enough to buy mother a few doses of painkillers. Oh, right. My few shops are kept for my own retirement. You had better not covet them, Marquis. Having finished speaking, I did not bother to spare them another glance. Turning around and striding out of Xuan Hall, behind me came Gu Changfeng's exasperated roars and the old matriarch's despairing wails. Today's sunlight, the more it shone, the more comfortable it made one feel. After old matriarch Gu was paralyzed in bed, the entire Xuan Hall was filled day and night with an unspeakable foul stench. Because the Marquise's manor had lost my financial support entirely, it was like a corpse drained of its blood, where even the servants walked around in low spirits. Yet inside my Manhua pavilion, everything was full of life. Reclining on the soft couch, I flipped through the account books. The account books that had just been delivered, listening to Kuiju report this month's income, while planning to go to the city's largest jewelry store tomorrow to have a set of pure gold headwear made. The young maid guarding the door outside lifted the bead curtain and announced in a low voice,
Madam, the Marquis is here.
Before I could put away the account books, Gu Changfeng strode right in. There were dark circles under his eyes, paired with his deliberately crafted expression of misery. He was the very picture of a good man crushed by the heavy burden of life.
Mother is gravely ill, and the estate truly cannot make ends meet anymore. These past few days, for the sake of the Marquisate's livelihood and imperial court affairs, I've been so anxious that I haven't slept for nights.
As he spoke, he glanced out of the corner of his eye at the account books on the table that hadn't been put away yet, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. I watched his performance with cold detachment and didn't even pour him a cup of tea. Why is the Marquis telling me all this? I've already handed over the tally tokens and keys. I'm just an idle bystander who doesn't manage affairs anymore. Gu Changfeng was choked by my words, a flash of anger flitting through his eyes, but he quickly forced it down again. He sat down on the chair beside me, covered his face with both hands in agony, and spoke with a slight choke in his voice.
Ruya, I know you're angry, but as the head of the household, seeing the family in such a miserable state cuts me to the heart. Do you think I'm living well? To save money for mother's medical treatment, to maintain the last shred of decency for the Marquis' mansion, I haven't even dared to eat a single bite of meat. I hide in the study every day, eating cheap chaff and wild herbs, not even daring to brew a pot of hot tea. I, a Grand Marquis, am living worse than a beggar on the street. Ruyu, we are husband and wife after all. Can't you show some understanding for my hardships and help the Marquis mansion get through this crisis?
Listening to his touching and heartfelt speech, I almost couldn't help but laugh out loud. Eating coarse chaff and wild herbs, not even willing to drink a cup of hot tea. Although the original owner of this body was easy to fool, I am no fool. In the memories I inherited, it was written, crystal clear, that this scumbag, Gu Changfeng, had a secret compartment hidden behind the antique shelf in his study, where he kept a whopping 5,000 taels of silver banknotes. That was the money he planned to use to bribe officials at the Ministry of Personnel, to secure a promotion, and, in passing, to buy Lin Chushu that ruby set, worth 1,000 taels of silver. He spends my money outside to play the big shot, and now he turns around to cry poverty to me. Target character Gu Changfeng, detected, currently fabricating a sob story, eating coarse chaff and wild herbs, and entire family fortune depleted, attributes locked. Sob story forced realization system, triggered. The long-lost mechanical voice rang in my mind again. Looking at Gu Changfeng's utterly hypocritical face, a mocking smile appeared in my eyes. Your lordship indeed has a heart of devotion. It is truly moving. Since your lordship is so poor that you can barely afford to eat, and you eat coarse chaff and wild herbs in your study every day, then heaven will surely grant your lordship this penance. Gu Changfeng didn't catch the hidden barb in my words, thinking I was swayed by him. His face lit up with joy, just as he was about to open his mouth to ask for money. Right at that moment, a sharp, panicked cry suddenly came from outside the courtyard.
Somoni, help! Fire! There is a fire. My lord, this is bad. Your study is on fire.
What did you say? Quick, go put out the fire. If the ancient books and paintings inside are burned, I'll flay you alive.
En? No, that is not it, my lord. The fire has already been put out. But that fire was incredibly bizarre. The desk in the study and the paintings and calligraphy are all completely fine. It only burned down the wall recess behind the display shelf.
Gu Changfeng felt as if he had been struck by lightning.
The wall recess behind the display shelf? My secret compartment. My 5,000 taels of banknotes.
Gu Changfeng let out a shrill, agonizing shriek. No longer caring about his dignified bearing as a marquis, he lifted his robes like a madman and rushed outside, sitting on the soft daybed. I unhurriedly lifted my teacup and took a sip. Can't handle even this. The good show has only just begun.
My lord, all your money has been completely burned by the fire. Not even a speck of ash is left.
Having suffered an immense shock, he fainted dead away on the spot. Only after having his acupressure points pinched did he wake up. Upon waking, Gu Changfeng's breath was weak, and his entire body trembled. Because of Lin Chuchu's previous misfortune and the old matriarch's paralysis, panic already gripped the household. To soothe Gu Changfeng's emotions, and to prove that the Marquise's estate had not completely collapsed, the butler gritted his teeth and pawned one of his own silver bracelets. He ordered the kitchen to prepare a table of fine dishes for Gu Changfeng: braised pork meatballs, steamed 8 treasure duck, and double-boiled black chicken soup with ginseng. An aromatic, mouth-watering scent filled the entire table. Gu Changfeng sat at the table, looking at this table full of delicacies. His eyes turned red. He desperately needed a good meal to comfort his heart, which had been shattered by the fire. He picked up his chopsticks, lifted a glistening, richly colored meatball, and put it into his mouth with great anticipation. However, on the very first chew, his expression changed drastically. Gu Changfeng pushed his chair back violently, covered his mouth, and began to retch violently. The meatball, which was supposed to be savory and tender, turned into something else entirely in his mouth. It tasted like a thick, foul blast of sour, rotting garbage water. The nauseating taste rushed straight to his head. He frantically spat the food onto the floor, grabbed the teapot from the table, and without even bothering to use a cup, poured it directly down his throat. But the premium Balushan tea, the moment it hit his tongue, tasted like muddy swamp water, complete with the sour stench of stagnant, stale dishwater. Gu Changfeng sprayed the mouthful of muddy water everywhere, tears and mucus streaming down his face, refusing to believe it. His hand trembled as he tore off a leg of the 8 treasure duck. He closed his eyes and took a bite. With a sharp crunch, it felt as if he had chewed a mouthful of dry bark and coarse chaff, scraping painfully down his throat, and along with it came that same sickening, swill-like taste.
Who made this food? Guards, drag the chef out and give him 30.
Gu Changfeng broke down completely and flipped the table. Plates shattered all over the floor, and soup splashed everywhere. The butler and the servants fell to their knees in terror, shivering uncontrollably.
Please, my lord, have mercy. These dishes were just freshly made. We could smell how delicious they were in the kitchen just now.
The butler summoned his courage, picked up a piece of duck meat from the floor that hadn't touched the dirt, and stuffed it into his mouth. His eyes instantly widened in shock.
My lord, this meat is absolutely delicious.
Gu Changfeng froze. He looked at the food scattered across the floor, which was still wafting an enticing aroma. He recalled once again the oath he had just sworn. At this moment, Gu Changfeng finally realized what was happening. He collapsed into his chair, his face as pale as ash. Looking at the food scattered all over the floor, he could no longer hold it in. With a loud sob, he wept in utter despair. Kueju described what happened in the front yard, vividly and dramatically to me.
Madam, you should have seen the Marquise's state. He was vomiting uncontrollably in front of a table of fine dishes. Now he is holding a bowl of plain water and forcing down cold, dry cornbread. I heard that is the only thing he can swallow without feeling nauseous.
I raised an eyebrow, my fingertips lightly tapping on the table. This is just the beginning, my dear Marquis. What you owe the original owner of this body, you will have to pay back slowly. Since Gu Changfeng could only survive on cornbread, the Marquis of Yang'an's estate finally enjoyed a few days of peace. But I knew this was merely the calm before the storm. A wild dog driven into a corner would eventually try to leap over the wall and bite back. And sure enough, Early this morning, just as I finished my breakfast, the courtyard gate of Lanue Pavilion was violently burst open by a dozen crude maidservants wielding wooden clubs. Leading them was Gu Changfeng's trusted steward. Shedding his usual flattering manner, he pointed at me and barked sharply.
Which, by order of the Marquis, you are to be taken to the main hall immediately for trial.
I sat before the dressing table, without even raising an eyelid. What is the rush? I'm still touch up my makeup. I stood up, smoothed down my glistening cloud brocade gown, and flicked an invisible speck of dust from my sleeve. Lead the way. I'd like to see what kind of play your lordship is putting on this time. As soon as I stepped into the courtyard of the main hall, I was taken aback by the spectacle before me. To deal with me, Gu Changfeng had really spared no expense. In the massive courtyard, he had actually invited several prominent noble matriarchs from the capital, and even the highly respected Prince Jing of the imperial clan. Right in the center, a massive altar was set up. A shady Taoist priest, wearing a bagua robe and holding a peach-wood sword, was dancing around wildly, muttering incantations under his breath. Gu Changfeng stood beside Prince Jing, his eyes red with tears, wearing a look of restrained grief and pain. Lady Cao from the third branch stood to the side, looking haughty and smug, and even the bedridden old dowager Gi had been carried out on a stretcher by the servants, lying there and groaning constantly.
Shen Ruyu, kneel down at once, you wicked woman.
I let out a soft chuckle. Not only did I not kneel, instead, I walked over to the courtyard, right next to the only empty armchair, and sat down. What kind of show is your lordship putting on now? Setting up an altar for a ritual? Do you think our household isn't chaotic enough?
You still dare to make excuses.
Gu Changfeng turned to look at Prince Jing, dropped to his knees with a thud, and began to weep bitterly.
Your Highness, please see the truth. My Gu family has been loyal and upright for generations, but ever since I married this treacherous woman, our home has never known a single day of peace. She is not the daughter of the Shen family at all. She is an evil spirit possessing a human body. She has drained all the fortune of my Marquis mansion.
Like an aggrieved victim, he recounted everything that had happened over the past few days, embellishing and exaggerating every detail. Finally, he pointed at the shady priest and said,
The master, he has already divined. This demoness is the culprit behind the ruin of my entire Gu family. I invited all our elders here today to bear witness. I want to divorce this demoness in public and drown her in the pond to serve as a warning to others.
Hearing this, the matriarchs of the noble families nearby began whispering to one another, pointing and gesturing at me, their eyes filled with disgust and fear.
No wonder successive disasters have struck the Marquis of Yang'an's manor lately. It turns out it was a family misfortune, marrying a demon. That child, Changfeng, has truly suffered.
Hearing the sympathy of the people around him, Gu Changfeng got more and more into his act. He stood up, walked to the center of the courtyard, spread his arms wide, and cried out to the heavens, pushing the finest acting of his life to the absolute limit.
Look at me, Gu Changfeng. Look at my pitiful Marquise's manner. My Gu family treated her well, yet since she entered our doors, my kind mother has been paralyzed in bed, wishing she were dead. My frail, beloved concubine has broken meridians and keeps coughing up blood. My Grand Marquise's manor has been completely ruined by her curse, left with bare walls and utterly destitute. Look at this courtyard, everyone. Look at these eaves. My grand manor of the Marquis of Yong'an is so poor that we have no money to repair the leaking roof, and the plaster on the walls is almost completely gone. Our entire family, young and old, is simply the most miserable and tragic in the entire capital. Oh heavens, open your eyes and look.
The entire place fell silent. Everyone was shocked by Gu Changfeng's hysterical and miserable lament. But sitting in the armchair, as I watched his try-hard performance, the smile on my face could no longer be suppressed and gradually became unbridled. How wonderful. Since you're begging for it, you can't blame me. Target character, Gu Changfeng, has been detected. He is currently performing extreme collective self-pity, destitute with bare walls, a leaking roof, peeling wall plaster, and the most miserable person in the capital tags have all been locked. Ultimate disaster level, forced realization, is launching immediately. The very instant the system's prompt faded, a deafening clap of thunder suddenly erupted. In the originally cloudless blue sky, purple lightning struck down like a sharp sword, unerringly, right onto the eaves of the main hall. It hit the gold-lettered plaque of Yong'an Marquis Mansion, bestowed by the Emperor. The plaque, which symbolized a century of the mansion's glory, instantly shattered into pieces and crashed down right at Gu Changfeng's feet.
What is going on?
Before anyone could react, an extremely eerie gale rose from the ground. This wind raged only within the buildings of Yong'an Marquis Mansion, kicking up dust and stones, turning the sky dark. Immediately after, spine-chilling cracking sounds echoed from all directions. The roof of the main hall, which Gu Changfeng had just complained was leaking, was actually blown completely off without any warning. Countless tiles and beams rained down like a torrential downpour. The walls peeled bare, and the curse of destitute with bare walls followed immediately, amid the terrified screams of everyone present. The high, sturdy blue brick courtyard walls of the mansion seemed to be pushed by an invisible, giant hand, collapsing section by section with a resounding crash, turning into dust that filled the air. The guests watching the ceremony were scared out of their wits and scrambled to flee outside on all fours. But this destructive blow seemed to have eyes. It precisely avoided innocent bystanders and fell entirely upon the heads of the Gu family. Old Madame Gu, who was paralyzed on a stretcher, was flipped over along with her stretcher, rolling over and over into a muddy pit created by the falling debris, her entire body covered in foul-smelling mud, looking just like a mud monkey. Meanwhile, standing at the center of the storm, Gu Changfeng experienced the most extreme devastation. The brocade robe on his body, which had barely maintained his dignity, seemed to undergo thousands of years of weathering in the wild wind, shredding inch by inch into dirty, ragged strips of cloth. Hanging off him, the hair crown on his head shattered, leaving his hair disheveled and his face covered in black ash. In just a matter of dozens of seconds, the wind died down and the clouds dispersed. The entire Marquis of Yongan estate was no more. Only a devastated ruin remained on the spot, where not even a single intact wall could be found. Completely and utterly, it had become a place with nothing but bare walls. On the street, countless citizens of the capital, drawn by the thunderous noise, watched in dumbfoundment in the ruins at the members of the Giyu family, who were barely clothed and resembled roadside beggars. At the edge of the ruins, I remained seated upright and proper, on that completely undamaged armchair. I looked at the dumbstruck Gu Changfeng. My lord, just now you begged the heavens to open their eyes and see. Look. Haven't the heavens shown their presence? They have completely fulfilled your wish to be the most miserable, tragic souls in the capital. Amidst the sprawling ruins, silence reigned supreme. The once overbearing Marquis of Yongan estate was now reduced to broken walls and debris. Amidst the swirling dust, the nobles of the capital retreated repeatedly, dreading to be tainted by the Gu family's misfortune, and quickly slipped away one after another. Gu Changfeng knelt blankly among the piles of rubble, still clutching half of a peachwood sword that had been charred by lightning. My lord, the show is over. It is time to tend to proper business. I stood up, calmly dusting off my skirt. The guards brought out several large red sandalwood chests from the ruins. I drew out a sheet of paper stamped with red ink. I tossed it lightly onto his soot-covered face. This is a divorce agreement. Sign it, and from this day forward, our marriage is over, and we have nothing to do with each other. Gu Changfeng's hand trembled as he grabbed the paper. As he read the words clearly, a look of twisted malice erupted in his eyes. He violently tore the divorce agreement to shreds.
In your dreams, you ruined my Marquise's manner like this, and now you want to just walk away. Keep dreaming.
He scrambled up from the muddy ground, stumbling.
In life, you belong to the Gu family, and in death you will be a ghost of the Gu family. Even if my family home is now a pile of ruins, you will stay here and beg for food with me. I will go to the Shunshin prefecture right now to beat the drum and cry grievance. I will sue you for filial impiety and spreading heretical, misleading words.
Looking at his maddened, frantic state, I was not angry at all. Instead, I raised an eyebrow with great interest. I gestured for Kueju to prepare the carriage. The Shunshin prefecture, is it? I will personally accompany you there, my lord. An hour later, outside the gates of the Shunshin prefecture court, a crowd of curious citizens of the capital had gathered. Gu Changfeng, dressed in tattered rags, with his hair disheveled, knelt in the middle of the hall. The prefect of Shunshin sat high on the bench, staring at the once glorious Marquis of Yongan kneeling below. He was so shocked that he even forgot to strike his gavel.
Who beats the drum below the court? What is your accusation?
Like a drowning man clutching at a straw, Gu Changfeng kowtowed vigorously several times. With tears streaming down his face, he began his most practiced performance.
Your Honor, I wish to accuse my wicked wife Shenruya. She has shown disrespect to her mother-in-law and abused my concubine. Furthermore, she used some kind of witchcraft to destroy my ancestral home.
He knelt on the ground, beating his chest and stamping his feet, painting himself as a miserable husband driven to the brink by an evil wife.
Your Honor, look at the state of me. These past few days, I have been tormented by this vile woman so much that I cannot sleep at night. I wash my face with tears day after day, and I have cried until my eyes are nearly blind. My heart is full of grievances, with nowhere to voice them. It feels as though I have swallowed knives in my throat, hurting so much that I cannot even utter a single word. I am about to become completely mute. I am now a useless, blind, and mute man. I beg your honor to serve justice for me.
Hearing this blood-weeping accusation, the onlookers, though finding the Marquis household situation bizarre, could not help but feel a shred of pity for Gu Changfeng. However, standing to the side. I could barely contain my laughter. Target character Gu Changfeng detected, maliciously playing the victim in the court, crying until blind, too painful to speak, and useless, blind and mute man tags have been locked. The compulsory fulfillment system has been triggered. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was originally solemn and grave, just as Gu Changfeng was waiting with anticipation for the governor to arrest me. His eyes suddenly felt an extremely sharp, stabbing pain. Gu Changfeng let out a blood-curdling shriek. He tightly clutched his eyes with both hands as dark red blood flowed down like small streams through his fingers. When he painfully pulled his hands away, the entire crowd gasped in horror. His eyes, which had been perfectly normal moments ago, were now covered with a layer of grayish-white cataracts. His eyes had completely lost focus, turning into two ghostly pale glass beads. Gu Changfeng crawled frantically on the ground in sheer terror, waving his hands blindly around. He tried to scream for help, but when he opened his mouth, only a bizarre raspy wheezing sound came from his throat. It was as if his vocal cords had withered instantly and snapped. No matter how hard he tried, he could not utter a single word.
Damn, demonic forces are at work. Quick, drag him out of here quickly. Don't let him dirty the courtroom.
The bailiffs snapped out of it, holding their wooden staffs, and as if driving away a plague god, they dragged the blind and mute Gu Changfeng away. I walked up to Gu Changfeng unhurriedly and pulled a brand new divorce agreement from my sleeve. I grabbed his dirt and blood-stained hand and pressed it hard onto the divorce agreement without ceremony. Since the Marquis is blind and mute, I suppose this lawsuit cannot proceed. I took the signed divorce agreement and put it away carefully. This divorce agreement, I will assume you signed it voluntarily. I wish you a long life, Marquis. In this silent and dark world. With that said, I curtsied slightly to the shaken prefect on the bench, then turned and walked out of the Shenshin prefectural court. Outside, the sunlight was glaring, and the air was fresh. I took a deep breath, feeling that the sky of the capital had never been this blue. After the court session at Shenshin prefectural court, Gu Changfeng became a complete laughingstock in the capital. A blind and mute cripple, accompanied by a quadriplegic old woman, now had to face the misery of being homeless on the streets. Meanwhile, with the divorce agreement in hand, I returned to the Shen family home in a grand manner and officially took over all the shops under my name. On this day, I was auditing accounts on the second floor of Zhenbao Pavilion, the largest jewelry store under my name. Suddenly, a commotion came from downstairs, mingled with a woman's coquettish whimpering and an old man's greasy, teasing laughter.
Master Jin, you must seek justice for me.
The voice was so artificial, it was nauseating, but I found it remarkably familiar. I pushed open the window panel and looked down, only to see that in the main hall of Zhenbao Pavilion, there stood a thin, gaunt woman. She seemed entirely spineless, clinging limply to a pot-bellied, fleshy-faced, wealthy merchant. It was none other than Lady Cao from the third branch. I heard that after the Gu family estate was seized, Gu Changfeng and the Grand Dowager became completely disabled. Lady Cao couldn't bear the hardship of begging with them, and actually stole the last jade pendant from Gu Changfeng's person, pawned it for some silver, and set out to find herself a wealthy old man in the capital to be her new backer. This Mr. Jin was a notorious parvenu in the capital, whose greatest pleasure was taking concubines to dally with. Lady Cao had clearly climbed onto this high branch, as she was pestering Mr. Jin to buy her jewelry. As luck would have it, she looked up, and across the railing of the second floor, Lady Cao's eyes met mine. Lady Cao's eyes darted around, and a scheme instantly came to her mind.
Mr. Jin, that is the wicked woman. She snatched away all of my family's property and reduced me to wandering the streets.
Mr. Jin followed her pointing finger and looked up. Seeing that I was elegantly dressed and possessed an extraordinary demeanor, he was stunned for a moment. Then, to save face in front of the beauty, he puffed out his chest and bellowed.
What audacity! To dare bully a concubine of mine, Jin? Shopkeeper, tell your owner to get down here.
The shopkeeper broke into a cold sweat, and the assistant quickly stepped up with a placating smile.
Mr. Jin, the lady upstairs, is indeed the chief proprietor of our Zhenbao Pavilion, Lady Shen.
Upon hearing this, Mr. Jin's face froze instantly. Nowadays in the capital, who doesn't know the prestigious name of Shen Ruyue? She is the highly sought-after wealthiest person, backed by a level of wealth. Even the government has to show some respect. He forcefully pushed Lady Cao away.
How dare you offend the great boss, Shen? If you want to die, don't drag me down with you.
Seeing her newly found patron about to leave her, Lady Cao panicked. She fell to her knees with a thud, clinging tightly to Lord Jin's leg, and began her practiced sob story performance.
My lord, do not be deceived by this witch's appearance. I was originally an innocent and pure maiden. It was she who drove me to a dead end, forcing me to fall this low. I swear to heaven that my body and mind are pure, and there is not a single word of lie in what I say. If I have spoken even half a lie, let heaven punish me by turning me into an ugly monster that makes everyone vomit upon sight, dying a miserable death
to secure Lord Jin as her cash cow. The vicious oath she swore was filled with blood-weeping earnestness and extreme cruelty. The female customers browsing jewelry nearby stopped in their tracks one after another, pointing and whispering at us, standing on the second floor. I watched her solemn oath-taking display, slowly lifted the teacup by my side, and gently blew on the floating foam. Target character Lady Cow detected. Maliciously fabricating a sob story in progress. The turn into an ugly monster clause has been locked. The forced fulfillment system has been triggered. At the exact millisecond, the mechanical voice ceased. Lady Cow's hands, which were still clinging to Lord Jin's leg, suddenly began to tremble violently.
It is so itchy. Why is it so itchy?
Unable to resist, she let go of her hold and began to scratch her arms and neck frantically. The cheap, gaudy dress she wore was torn to shreds by her own claws, upon the skin exposed to the air, at a speed visible to the naked eye. Pustules the size of soybeans began to erupt one after another.
My face hurts so much.
She rolled on the ground in agony, clawing wildly and aimlessly at herself. The entire place fell dead silent. Everyone stared at the monster on the ground in disbelief. Standing closest to her, Master Jin looked at this face, terrifying as a malevolent demon, and smelled the pungent, rancid stench. His stomach churned violently, and he threw up on the spot.
Get lost? Hurry up and throw this monster out of here. How bloody bad luck.
Master Jin vomited uncontrollably while retreating in sheer panic, shouting orders at the servants behind him. Several servants covered their noses, grabbed brooms, and like sweeping away trash, mercilessly beat Madame Cao, who was rolling on the floor, right out the doors of the treasure pavilion.
No, don't throw me out. Master, save me. It is so itchy.
Outside the door, Madame Cao's shrill, agonizing cries, accompanied by the wild barking of stray dogs on the street, gradually faded into the distance. Standing by the railing on the second floor, I leisurely took a sip of this year's freshly harvested pre-Qingming Longjing tea, making such a vile vow. Now it has actually come true. I'm sorry. But in front of my system, the price of a lie is extremely expensive. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, it was deep winter. This was the coldest winter the capital had seen in nearly a decade. Feather-like heavy snow had been falling continuously for 3 days and 3 nights, shrouding the entire imperial city in a bone-chilling, silvery white. On Vermilion Bird Avenue, the busiest street in the south of the city, the snow had been swept perfectly clean. Inside the Juxian Pavilion, the largest restaurant under my name, the underfloor heating was burning fiercely, filling the air with a warm, pleasant fragrance. I reclined lazily on the soft couch of a private booth on the second floor. On the table sat a piping hot red clay stove. Upon it, a fine Western region wine was warming, and beside it was freshly roasted venison, sizzling with hot oil.
Boss. This year, the year-end dividends from all the shops under our name have all been calculated.
She smilingly handed over a thick, gold-embossed ledger.
It is 30% more than we had anticipated. In this capital city today, when it comes to financial power, if you claim to be second, I fear no one would dare claim to be first.
I gave a soft chuckle, not taking the ledger, but simply lifting my glass cup to sip the warm wine. In the 6 months since leaving the Marquis of Yongon's estate, relying on modern business thinking and ample starting capital, I've been forging ahead triumphantly all the way, and making waves in this ancient business world, without a leech of a scumbag husband, without a bizarre mother-in-law, and without having to abide by those ridiculous rules of female virtue. I could now sleep in as late as I wanted, and spend money however I pleased. Now this is what life is about. I turned my head to look out the window. The wind and snow are heavy outside. Tell the kitchen to set up 2 large cauldrons in the back alley, to distribute porridge to the beggars and refugees in the city.
You are truly kind, boss. I will see to it right away.
An hour later, in the back alley of Juxian Pavilion, a long queue had formed. Having nothing to do, I pushed open the carved wooden window on the second floor, watching the refugees below holding hot porridge and offering endless thanks. Just then, a sudden commotion broke out at the end of the alley.
Get lost. Don't block the way. How dare 2 monsters come to grab porridge?
Several strong beggars kicked over a dilapidated wooden wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow flipped onto its side in the snow, and rolling down from it was, reeking of a foul stench, was a stiff-limbed old woman. She lay prone in the snow, without even the strength to turn over, able only to let out weak groans. And beside the wheelbarrow lay a blind man, with a face covered in black soot. His mouth was open, but he could only make mute, raspy gasps, his hands clawing desperately through the snow, trying to grab the hot porridge spilled on the ground. Behind them followed a woman. Her exposed arms and neck were entirely covered in festering, scabbed sores. It was none other than Gu Changfeng, the old dowager Gu and Lady Tao, once lofty nobles of a marquise's household. Now even the lowliest beggars shunned them as bad luck. Lady Cao was so starved her eyes had turned wild. She lunged recklessly toward the porridge barrel, only to be blocked by a guard staff from Juxian Pavilion.
Where did this eyesore come from? Get in line.
Lady Cow was pushed down into the snow, looking up through the swirling snow, her eyes filled with resentment. Fixed intently on me, standing at the second-floor window, she saw the warm spring-like private room behind me, and the envy and resentment in her eyes almost consumed her entirely. She knew her life was completely ruined, but driven by intense hunger and an unbalanced hatred for me, she resorted to her most disgusting trick once again. With a thud, she knelt in the snow and began kowtowing frantically toward the second floor.
Oh, great benefactor, please look at our family. We haven't eaten a single grain of rice in over 10 days. My old bones have long lost all feeling from the cold. I beg you to show mercy and spare us a bite to eat. Otherwise, we will truly freeze to death into solid ice right before your restaurant's doors.
She wept bitter tears, attempting to hold me hostage with morality and human lives. Gu Changfeng, on the ground, also heard my name. His hollow, blind eyes, muddy tears flowed out. He made rasping sounds and desperately kowtowed in my direction. I looked down at their hideous display from above, my gaze as cold as if I were looking at dying insects. Even though they have fallen to such a state, the rotten nature in their bones still couldn't be changed. They truly thought playing the victim could get them everything. Dining. Target individual Lady Cow detected is engaging in extreme, fraudulent playing of the victim. Blood turning to ice crystals, turning into frozen ice sculptures, and freezing to death into ice blocks. All tags have been locked. The long-lost mechanical voice rang out crisply in my mind, sounding like a death knell. Since you want to become ice sculptures so badly, then I will show some mercy and grant your wish. The air in the alley seemed to freeze in an instant. An extremely eerie and domineering aura of absolute cold rose from beneath Lady Cow's feet without warning. A hair-raising sound of freezing rang out. Lady Cow's eyes widened in horror. She discovered that her blood had truly stopped flowing, a thick and hard layer of blue ice crystals, at a speed visible to the naked eye, rapidly spread upward from her ankles. Before her scream could fully escape her throat, the ice completely sealed her mouth, then crawled up her face, distorting her features in extreme terror, and freezing her forever in that exact moment. And she was not the only one. This causal punishment of extreme cold also descended upon Gu Changfeng and the old matriarch at the same time. The blind and mute Gu Changfeng still kept his posture of reaching out to beg, as he instantly turned into a crystal-clear ice sculpture. The paralyzed old matriarch on the snowy ground didn't even have room to struggle before she was directly frozen into a block of dead ice fused as one with the earth. The refugees queuing for porridge around them were all scared out of their wits by this miraculous scene. They all fell to their knees one after another, crying out that the heavens had manifested to punish the wicked. Close the window. The wind is getting a bit strong.
Yes, boss.
As the carved wooden window was gently closed, the filth and coldness in the back alley, along with that decayed past of the Marquis of Yonggan's estate, were completely shut out of my world. I raised my wine cup, faced the warm and bright room, and smiled faintly. This thoroughly satisfying new life is truly intoxicating.